Please. So esoteric philosophy and the major cultural role in Russia in the writings of Alice A. Bailey. My presentation will be just an overview of the writings of Alice Bailey due to, time limitations. Next one, please. So the goal of presentation is to give a brief overview, and I will briefly mention the relevance to philosophical practice, because it may at several occasions not be that obvious where the links are. And I will end my presentation with a few words about the cultural importance of Russia, not only philosophical relevance, but cultural in general for the entire world. Next slide.
Sorry, так, куда все делось? What happened?
This is a photo of Alice Bailey. She was born in England and spent most of her life in the United States, but traveled really widely also in Asia. You see her dates there. And what is remarkable about her is her 30-year cooperation with a Tibetan teacher, Yorn Krolл. He supposedly conveyed a total of 18 books to her telepathically. And I am reporting the main gist of those books with respect to philosophical practice. Next slide, please. In total, there are 24 books. In addition to the 18 books the Tibetan teacher telepathically transferred to her, she wrote 6 books on her own. The entire books are together over 10,000 printed pages. Next. Here's one of her books, Problems of Humanity, Cooperation of the Tibetan and Alice Bailey. Next. This is a website where you can read information about her, but basically about the books and also the training which the Lucis Trust offers in the so-called Arcane School, New York City, as a headquarters. Next. A view of some of the books. They're available in different formats, paper, of course, and on CDs, audiobooks, and most importantly today, books online. Next, please. The books are available not only in English, but in 7 other languages. And one of the languages, of course, Russian. You see here the website in Russian language. And again, online, you can read them under this dark blue sign in the middle of the page. Next. What is very important about the website is that you can do searches in the search box about all topics you are interested in. Next. So after these preliminary remarks, more on the substance. So the works really have a vast scope in terms of contents. They relate to cosmology, human evolution, about right human relations, the nature of consciousness and its unfoldment, especially in the two books about esoteric psychology, a very interesting and important book about esoteric healing, and about soul, our soul and its development. And I'll spend some time on this last topic, the soul. Next. A word on what I mean by esoteric. Definitely, it is not sort of mainstream philosophical practice and counseling, what is in those books and what the arcane school is teaching. The closest is the important Western Platonic and Neoplatonic philosophies. For instance, Plotinus is a major figure in Neoplatonic philosophy. Those are very related to the contents of the Bailey books. One common feature is the refinement and development of the soul as an active instrument of perception and cultural transformation. Next. A way to understand how esotericism is meant. Esotericism involves a life lived in tune with the inner subject realities, or a life with the soul as the animating consciousness found throughout nature. Next. The two main tasks of so-called esoteric practice, we can also say philosophical practice in the Platonic and Neoplatonic tradition, to discriminate between various types of energy and force in relation to oneself, so inner subjective reality, and in world affairs. The other one is to relate that what is seen and experienced to that which is unseen, conditioning and determining. Next. There are three progressive calls to wisdom. We are familiar with the first injunction, know thyself, the Delphic injunction that applies to every person. Next higher and more difficult call to follow is, no, I mean, can you go back? This was just my second point here. The second one, know the self, the big self, with a capital S. This call is addressed to persons who are on a spiritual or on a philosophical task. The third one, and even more rarefied one, is know the one. This call is addressed to very advanced human beings. Very often they are referred to as adepts. Next slide, please. So what is the soul according to the Bailey books? The soul is a medium that connects spirit on the one hand and matter on the other hand. And the interplay of this pair of opposites, spirit and matter, creates consciousness or sentiency. The soul plays upon matter and thereby creating specific physical forms. You will find very often in the box the phrase, form follows energy. So whatever we put energy, attention on, that is form creating. The soul aims for refinement, expansion, and perfection of forms. Next. A quote from the writings: "The bringing together of these two divine aspects results in the emergence of a third, which we call the soul. And through the medium of the soul, spirit develops a sentiency and a conscious awareness and capacity to respond." Next. If this sounds a little abstract, I want to mention some synonyms which are used: attractive energy, coherency, sentiency, aliveness, awareness or consciousness. The soul is a quality which every form manifests. Next. Major states of awareness. According to the Bailey books, there's consciousness in every form. So even in the mineral kingdom, there is consciousness. So in sand and stone and minerals. But the awareness is stratified. It has levels. On the next higher level, there is intelligent sentient consciousness, as in plants. The next higher one is animal consciousness. The following higher one, still human consciousness or self-consciousness. And the higher one on the human scale is group consciousness. For instance, the one we have here at our conference. So the soul has an evolutionary drive. As I mentioned, soul is everywhere. And if you add self-consciousness, you have the consciousness of a human being. And if you add to that group consciousness, we have lovers and masters of wisdom. And a still higher level, you have awareness of divine synthetic purpose or advanced spiritual realization on a progressive scale. Next. The soul is threefold, consisting of spiritual will, spiritual love, spiritual intelligence. Spiritual love is very important, especially during our current days. It has the following characteristics: group consciousness, inclusiveness, acting as a mediator, attraction, unification, and vision of one world or one earth. Next. I briefly want to mention one famous psychologist and medical doctor, Roberto Assagioli. He worked with the Arcane School and Alice Bailey. Here he states. Next slide, please. In terms of time, I don't want to go into this psychological constitution according to him. If we have time, we can go back. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. According to Assagioli, he has developed several techniques of what he calls psychosynthesis based on the material which Alice Bailey made available. One technique is self-identification, and then disidentification. I'll come back to that briefly. Development of the will, training for imagination, training of the imagination, use of intuition, interpersonal relationship training, and music as a healing art. Next. So this is one of the techniques he suggests based on the teaching material in Bailey's books. It goes as follows. I have a body, but I am not my body. I have emotions, but I am not my emotions. I have a mind, but I am not my mind. And what may remain after such increased disidentification? A center of self-awareness. I find this exercise very important in today's world. No, can you go back? Yeah, great, thank you. Now, can you go back to the slide? On disidentification. Thank you. Not only in international politics or local politics, national politics, but also in philosophy, we often find that we as philosophers really identify with our particular philosophical convictions and with our philosophical practices. That is fine and good. For our group awareness and group consciousness, it is important that we have a distance even to our most dearly held convictions. In other words, that we have a freedom even regarding the philosophical convictions we are holding very dear. This is one application possibility. Next. Next slide, please. Good. Now a few words on Russia, which I find in the Bailey books. She is commenting on various nations, and each nation seems to have a particular task in the evolution of humanity. So here are a few regarding Russia. Russia's spiritual motto, which is as yet unrealized, she says, is I link two ways. And the way to understand is Russia is linking the East and the West. The book states that Russia has spiritual harmlessness and essential brotherhood, in the book called The Destiny of Nations. Next slide, please. Here a quote, Russia, that great nation, a synthesis of East and West, inherently stands for a new world consciousness, and through her means, a new planetary expression will gradually be wrought out in the fire of experiment and experience. Next slide. Russia is the home of a germinating revelation of great spiritual value and group significance, a revelation for all mankind. Next. Here I list several resources, with the basic one, lucistrust.org, in several languages. And the other ones are more detailed one about how to read the books online free of charge. Next, which should be the last one, this ends my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. And if we have time, I'll be glad to answer a few questions.
So Jorn, I wanted to ask you about the application to philosophical practice, especially philosophical counseling? Like, where would you suggest that philosophical counselors enter into this work in the most practical way?
Philosophical counseling with this particular perspective, which I have outlined, is very different from any academic approach to philosophy. As you can tell, it puts less emphasis on conceptual understanding. It is more interested in the development of the whole person. So, for instance, the disidentification exercise is an example of a way of how people could disidentify themselves from beliefs, opinions, group pressure they typically identify with. It is a cultivation of the soul, or the cultivation of sentiency. That would be a general approach. And how that looks in each case, I cannot outline. It depends on, of course, the client and the philosophical practitioner, what they bring together in terms of two souls developing together. So so philosophical practice is more like a communal soul development rather than a mental conceptual exercise.
Thank you, Jörn, for your contribution, for your kind words about Russia and place Russia in this duration. And Jörn, our regular guest in our conference in Russia, that's especially the honor for us. And I think we can go to conclusion our conference because our time limit today is very hard. And I thank you, Jörn, one more, and I invite all of us to next our meeting, conclusion of conference. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you all.